And now, from Glasgow.
So hi there, welcome to step 7 of my Lancaster. Now I want to do a little bit of an update. Some of you may be coming in, that's not necessarily an issue 1, maybe wondering why it's a little bit of a slow start. Trust me, it's just frustrating for me. So everything's a little bit slow at the moment for a combination of two things. Firstly, I'm ordering parts, aftermarket parts. Now these are coming from a company, I have used them before, I think I've used them before, I think they're very good. It's a company called Super Hobby. I think this is my second order with them, not had a problem with them before, but the drawback is they are a Polish based company and I'm in the UK and we are at the mercy of the postal gods. So the other thing that I'm at the mercy of is the fact that I need to record issues well in advance because I do my work schedule sees me working in London for 3 weeks and then I come home for 3 weeks. Then I go back to London for 3 weeks, then I come home on holiday for a week and that cycle repeats. So at the moment I'm working in Scotland, which means I get small amounts of time, which is why I'm doing, it may be taking me 2 to 3 days to do one video. When I'm on holiday, obviously I get all day. Obviously I have life as well, but so to fill you in, today should be the 5th of April. This is the day the video comes out. Today when I'm filming this, it's actually the 1st of March. Now on the 16th of March I go to London. And I don't return until the 6th of April. That means that I have to have all of my videos released right up to see all the way through to the 6th of April. Then I start filming again. As we stand at the moment, the parts that I'm waiting for, the instrument panel and a few other bits, they were prepared and posted on the 22nd of February, which is earlier than their original estimate, which I'm very happy for. It has been stuck in transport since the 26th of February at about 3:30 in the afternoon, and it hasn't moved since then. The updated estimated date of arrival is between Monday the 4th of March and the 21st of March. Now if it comes before the 16th of March, lovely, you're going to have a whole load of videos done. And if it comes later, then obviously I can't. So I'm going to make the unfortunate decision of today's video is actually going to be a two-parter. I'm going to be painting the figure, the pilot figure, and I'm going to do it in 2 stages. So we'll talk about all the paints today. Obviously I've not shown you how I brush paint. So we'll go through that in detail. As you're probably already aware, when I do something for the first time, I explain in not too much detail, but enough detail how I do things. And then when I do it for a subsequent time, I just say, do this, blah, 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 blah. For example, when I did the cleanup process, when I cut pieces off, I went into detail. And then from now on, I shall just say, cut off and clean the pieces. So what I'm going to do today is we are working on the pilot figure. I've already zenithal highlighted him, so I've gone through all the process of zenithal highlighting. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to lay down the base coats and then we'll give him a little bit of a wash. Now, doesn't mean that he's unhygienic. A wash means adding some detail, which I will explain a little bit later in the video. So the next update I want to show you is the nose of the Lancaster. So as you may be aware, I've cut out the platform to try and keep everything safe. I have kept the plastic on the canopy because I don't want to get that scratched. Obviously, if a part arrives scratched, then I'm straight onto the phone. I want a replacement. If I've scratched it, different matter. But what's really good is obviously there's a lot of painting, a lot of work to do, but we're now beginning to get an idea of the scale. So to try and keep everything fitting properly, safe, I've just done what we call a tape up, and all that means is that I've just taped the pieces together, make sure they do fit properly, which they do, and then that can sit there somewhere safe. So however, as you know, we always begin by having a look at what they're up to in Hachette land. So let's have a look. Okay, so I'm going to change the format of that just a little bit. What I've done is I've taken Building with the Boys 16:37 minute video. I've taken out all of the chat. So the actual build video is about 11 minutes and 12 seconds, which I'm going to reduce down to 3 to 5 minutes depending on how much I chit chat. So this is the flight engineer station, and it's just a push fit connections today. There's no gluing, no screwing. I was really happy with the detail there. Obviously the negative side is there's nothing you can do about this, but most of it is a dull RAF cockpit green with a little bit of splash of colour. Now there is a yellow railing. I don't know if I've mentioned it elsewhere in the video, so I'll mention it here. I thought at first that yellow railing was like if you're doing like a on display model, so that you go to the RAF museum, they've got yellow railings for health and safety. I did check whether that was correct, and it was actually yellow back in the day, so that is actually accurate. Really liking this, and I'd say 11 minutes for Building with the Boys is probably about an average build. There will be some builds that will be a lot quicker, and there will be some that will take ages, but most of his actual build segments is round about 10 to 15 minutes. So it's a little bit complicated. He does mention he's got fat fingers, which does slow him down a little bit. So yeah, I do actually really enjoy this. So yeah, good issue this week. So let's do some painting. So before we start painting, we need a little bit of prep. So what we are going to need is something to paint, obviously. So there's our little pilot ready to go. We are going to need some paints, obviously. Now, what paints do we need? I actually prefer to use AK Interactive paints, but a reference that I've found is the ICM paint set, as you can see there. This is the image that tells you all the different paints that you need for each particular part of the model. We're going to base this loosely on this because obviously our pilots, we've got some little intricacies and things. So obviously I need to convert those paints to ICM. So what I've done for that is, if I can just pull it up right quick, I use an app on my phone called Hobby Converter. And what this does, ignore that because this doesn't got ICM on it, but what you basically do is you can convert paints. So for example, if I'm going to pick one at random, if you've got a Humbrol colour number, let's pick an actual colour, 81 pale yellow matte, it then tells you all the equivalency. So if you don't have 81 Humbrol matte, you can also use AK Real Colours RC263, you can use a Tamiya XF. It also tells you how close the accuracy is. So XF4 is about 89% accurate compared to pale yellow matte. I actually don't bother 100% about the accuracies, because by the time I find that by the time you shade them and weather them, the colours are all going to change anyway. So my level of painting, I actually want something very similar. So obviously, if I need that colour, I'm not going to use that colour. But you know, if that isn't quite the right colour, I don't think it's going to matter too much. So because I'm converting, I need to keep a little list of things that I'm using. So 1003, let's bring that image up. So if you look, 1003 roughly in the middle, that's a yellow. 1003 converts quite nicely to 11045 deep yellow. And then I just keep a little list. There's a couple of odd bits on here that I've made an actual physical note. So 1060, you'll see 1060 is the life jacket. If you look at the figure on the left, he's carrying a little pack. That's 1060. That converts to 11124 middle stone. And then I'm using, this is where I've got to be careful. I did actually start to do the seat belts, which are now obsolete because they have them included on the figure. I can't remember the actual colour I used. I thought it was ochre, but ochre is the colour that I'm going to use for the seat belts. And I'm also going to use middle stone 24 for the life jacket. Now you'll see on there that their life jackets are yellow. Now I am led to believe that Guy Gibson did not use a standard RAF issue life jacket. He used some German one. So I'm going to be doing the German one in middle stone, and I'm going to be doing the seat belts in ochre. It's a near match. So we make our little list. Next thing we're going to need is a palette. Now there's two kind of palettes. One that you'll be familiar with scale modelling, which is just a piece of something waterproofy that you could just put your paints on and use that to paint. Some people use little tubs. It really depends on what I'm doing. When I'm doing figure painting, I tend to use a flat palette. When I'm doing, if I'm mixing for the airbrush, excuse me, let me just move my spray pot, I tend to use these little pots, and I can mix in the pot and then pour it into the airbrush. And sometimes I just use straight palettes. It really depends on the job. Something that I'm going to discuss in the next video is what's called a wet palette. A wet palette is something that's designed to keep your, as your name might suggest, designed to keep the paint wet. So what you can actually find yourself doing is you can do some painting and then put the lid on the wet palette, come to it back to it a week or two later, and the paint is still wet. It's also very good if you want to thin. See, with using this palette, if I thin the paint down, I have to thin all of the paint. If I have an area where I want the paint thinner and another area where I want the paint thicker, you know, it tends to be the same. With a wet palette, you can control it a lot more. We will be using a wet palette in the next issue when I do some shading work. So not shading, some highlighting work. Today we are going to just be laying down the base coats and then getting a wash on it. And then we'll be leaving it there, and we'll be dealing with it next week. So we will need some oil paints, which is something I will deal with a little bit later in the video when we get to it. And quite obviously, we're going to need some brushes. Now, I've built my brush collection up over many years. I have my preferred brush. One brush that I tend to not use are these synthetic brushes. These are good brushes, please don't get me wrong. This is a standard Humbrol brush that you'll get with any starter set. This is a size 4, but now these are synthetic nylon bristles, and they do the job very, very well. I tend to go a little bit premium, All of my brushes I tend to buy from a company called Rosemary & Co. I will mention their name. I'm not being paid by them, but I think they are a very, very... Basically, you're getting a premium brush for a budget price. These are as good as Winsor & Newton brushes at roughly about a third to a fifth of the cost. So these brushes here are sable brushes. I'm not going to go into the science of the brush types because I really don't know it too well. I believe sable is a natural hair from an animal, and I find it's a really good brush, and I use these for laying down the base coats. Base coat is when you are just getting the first layers of paint on and away you go. When it comes to doing more finely detailed work, I use Kolinsky sable. Now these are better than sable in my opinion, but they're a little bit more fragile, and they're a lot more expensive. As a comparison, this obviously this came free with Humbrol, but this is probably about £1 or £2 for this one brush. This is probably about I don't know how much this costs now, to be absolutely honest with you. Let's have a look. Series 98, size 1. This is £4.79, fiver. I've had this brush for 4 or 5 years, so it is a good investment. Now a size 1 in a Kolinsky sable is £7.60, but to be honest with you, I think the Kolinsky sable is twice the brush that the sable is. Anyway, I am going on way too much. So today, because I'm only laying down the base coats, I'm only going to be using my sable brushes, and I have 3 sizes. I have a size 1. I think with the size of the model, I think size 1 is going to be sufficient. I have size 0 for smaller areas, and I'm going to be using probably just once or twice a size 30. What a size 30 means, the smaller the number, the smaller the head. So you'll go 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Now, what's smaller than 0 is 0, 0. And what's smaller than that is 0, 0, 0. Rather than putting 0, 0, 0 on it, they just put 3, 0 on it, which just means 0, 0, 0. So if you get an even smaller one, I think the smallest they go is a 10, 0. And obviously you can imagine putting 10, 0 on it is a lot easier than putting 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0. Because then the handle would have to be this long to get the size on it. There are other brushes which I will use throughout the series. I have stippling brushes, I have brushes that I use for oils, and I have big flat brushes for when I'm painting large areas, and I have some smaller brushes with very long bristles, which I use for fine lines. They're really not needed in this particular stage, so I won't go into details. So let me do a bit of a zoom, and I'll give you a very, very quick anatomy of a brush. You essentially have a few areas of the brush. You have the handle, obviously. You have the ferrule. You have the brush. Now, the actual bristles, what we're aiming to do is keep the paint in the bottom 2/3 of the brush. You don't want the paint going up into the ferrule, because what happens once the paint goes in there, once it dries, it pushes the bristles outwards, so you end up with a splayed brush. I'll see if I've got any. There we go. Look, this is an old base brush. Can you see how those bristles are all coming outwards? And that's because I've got paint in the ferrule. It is possible to clean it, but to be honest with you, I would be quite happy to consider that as a damaged brush. So basically, when you're painting, you want to keep your paint nice and thin, and you want to be using the bottom 2/3 of your bristles. Now, I see people mixing paint with the paintbrush. Nothing wrong with that, except the cleanup process I think is horrible. So what I tend to do is using either a cocktail stick or an old damaged brush. These are some brushes that I brought. They're cheap Chinese brushes, and I think they're absolutely dreadful. So I use them for mixing paints. So what we're going to do, the next thing we're going to need is some thinner. Now you can get away with water. What I tend to find if you use water is the paint will split. What I mean by split is the paint becomes so thin it really doesn't adhere to the plastic very well. And if I can give you an example, I'm going to use, I want something, I haven't actually got anything I can demonstrate on, which is such a shame. Can I get away with using the inside of the, yeah, right. So let's get a little bit of paint. Okay. So if we get just a little bit of this paint and we mix it with water, and I'm going to really see what I mean about this brush. This brush is terrible. There's bristles all over the place. Right, so I'm going to seriously thin this paint. So this is about 5 brushfuls of water to 1 brushful of paint. And what you'll find is that when you paint it on, I don't know if you can see that, but that really doesn't want to stick. You see it's all bubbling and it's all running all over the place. It just really doesn't want to stick, because that's what I mean by split. Can you see you haven't got 100% coverage? If we were to use a thinner, it will certainly help with that. I call this paint water. This is essentially Tamiya thinner, but I make it myself. So what we're going to do is we're going to get a little bit of paint, and we're going to put roughly the same amount. In fact, I might even have a higher proportion of thinner to paint, and then when we paint that on, can you see that's gone on much nicer. I'm really sorry about the focus, guys, but can you see that's gone on so much nicer. That's the paint water, that's water only, and that's thinner, and you can see from the colour it's roughly about as thick as each other. So give me a second, I just want to wipe this off before it dries solid. So yes, I'm a big fan of using thinners. I'm not a big fan of paying the prices that they charge for thinners, so I make my own. I do have a video on my channel somewhere on making your own thinners. If you really want me to, I will explain how to do it, but essentially it's water, alcohol, paint retarder medium, which stops the paint from drying quite so quickly, and some flow aid, which helps the paint to flow off the brush and onto the plastic. If you're doing brush painting, you don't need to use retarder medium. It's just that when you're shooting paint through an airbrush, it has a tendency to dry a little bit quicker. So we have our figure somewhere. Here he is, and we need an order in which to paint him. And essentially there's 2 rules, and these rules will quite often overlap. It doesn't matter if you don't follow them, but rule number 1 is you paint your lower areas first. So where you have detail, you have multi-layers. If you paint, so say for example the face we'll do first. If we were to paint his helmet and his mask first, and then we go in and do the skin, there's a high chance that as we're getting in and doing the face, we'll end up painting onto the mask and the helmet that we've already painted. So what we'll do is we'll do the face first, and then I'll probably do the shirt next, because that's all lower detail. And then as we add the detail on the top, it's easier to miss the face. The next rule, which as I say may conflict, and that is you try to paint your lighter colours before your darker colours. Darker colours cover lighter colours a lot easier than the extreme example is if you end up having to paint white over black, you'll have a really hard job. We're going to be quite lucky with this model because most of the deep detail is actually a lighter colour. We've got flesh tones and we've got a light blue shirt, and it should be we shouldn't have a problem. Sometimes those rules will conflict. So say for example, if you have an African American pilot, so his skin's going to be quite dark and maybe he's got a yellow helmet, you're probably going to paint the skin first, so you're painting a darker colour before a light colour. That's just where the rules conflict sometimes, but we're going to be quite lucky. So with this, we're going to be painting the flesh tones first, and what I like to do with a flesh tone is I like to go slightly too dark, and then what we'll do is we'll add layers on top, and then we will lighten that up. So I'm going to be using AK11056 dark flesh. Now if you let me just pull this out again, because you know me, I'm gonna end up working off camera. Now I've got a little cheat mode involved, you'll probably just spot it. I've got some masking tape and that shows me my working area. So we get our paint. Now I've not used this before, so I need to give it a really good shake. What happens is all of the pigments soak to the drop to the bottom of the bottle, and you really need to give that a good shake. You can buy machines that shake paint. Yeah, absolutely nothing wrong with that, but I'm quite frugal and quite stingy, so I'm not paying money for what I can do with my arm. Right, so I'm just going to pop a dot on there. That's probably more than a dot. And when I'm doing layering colours, I like to slightly over thin my paint. I come from the school of thought that you are looking to cover with two coats. The first coat that you put down really won't look that good. You're just laying down a coat, and when you add the second coat, because the first coat is laid down nice and level, it's going to look wonderful. So most people will thin their paints to about 50-50. When they say 50-50, they mean equal part water, 1 part paint, 1 part water. When I say part, I mean whatever measurement you want. If you use 1 drop of paint, you use 1 drop of water. If you use 1 milliliter of paint, you use 1 milliliter of water, etc, etc. So this is 1 part paint, 1 part water. However, I'm just going to push that a little bit further because I know I can, because I'm using thinners. This may not work so well if you use water. And what I want is a nice consistency. I might even put more water in there. In fact, I'm going to put more water in there. Now this will lay down much nicer on primed models. This is one of the reasons we prime. I showed you earlier on that paint splitting, and yes, this is very close to splitting if you put this much water in. So I've got an air bubble. There we go. If you get bubbles while you're painting, what it simply means is you're painting too quickly. Slow yourself down. This isn't a rushing hobby. Rushing as in speed. It's take your time and enjoy yourself. Right, so that's my paint mixed. So what I like to do, if I possibly can, is find something either inconspicuous or something that isn't going to show, or a piece of paper. And then I just want to get a little bit of paint, and I'm just going to paint on there, and I want to see what it looks like. Kitchen roll works very, very well for this job actually, and I will use kitchen roll because that's another piece of equipment that you use. So get yourself a piece of kitchen roll, fold it in 2 or 4 depending on the size of it, and just pop it underneath your palette, and that will become quite clear why. So we just get a little bit of paint, and I'm quite happy with that. So all I'm simply going to do is, and I don't have to be neat doing this, I just want to block in all of the facial area, all of the skin. Right, so there is the first colour blocked in, which is the skin. I'm going to do a zoom. Oh, that's a bit too much. Now, as you can see, now you can't see because the focus isn't there, the coverage is quite terrible. It hasn't given it a solid coat, but what it has done, if you look at the hands, can you see the hands are much darker, and that's through the zenithal highlighting. So where it's gone on to the black shows through a lot more, and where it's painted over white, the colour's much more vibrant. Now, obviously I'm slowing myself down because I'm explaining this, but what I would do next is I would go on to the next colour and the next colour, and then once I've painted all of it, I'd go back and do a second coat. You may have to do your paint again because your paint will dry out. However, what I would do is, because I'm explaining this, I'll do the second coat of flesh again. But you normally need about 10 minutes. Now, if during the painting process, as you've worked your way down, it's more, whoops. So let's say you're doing a large area, say for example the back, as you work your way down, right, if you get about halfway to 3/4, you think, oh, that top bit, it's not, the coverage isn't quite good. Do not go over it again. Wait for it to dry before you apply any more paint, because otherwise you're going to start to make a mess. So make sure this dries. Because it's got alcohol in it, it'll dry rather quickly, so don't panic too much. So what we're going to do now is, that should be dry enough. I'm doing this in real time so you can see what I'm talking about. My camera's moved. Look, that's marked all of my... No, it hasn't. I've covered the mark up, that's why. Right, there we go. Right, so this will start to separate. So before you use it again, we want to just give it a slight little mix. Never ever let the paint go all the way up to the top of the ferrule. And another tip I actually forgot to tell you, and I think I actually did it. So when you get some paint on your brush, roll the brush, and you're twisting it as you roll it. That will bring the head to a nice point, and then with your kitchen roll, just gently knock the paint off the end of the brush, and that will stop you from flooding the model. So I'm going to go over with a second coat. Right, so let's have a look at what the second coat is. Now, I did say that normally you're aiming to do this in 2 coats, but I like to try and do it in 3 coats. So you'll see there that on... Just trying to get the focus. So what we've got 2 coats on there, and he's looking so much better. You've got these subtle tones where the zenithal highlight is showing through. If we look at it from underneath, you see his hand's got some shading, and it's a little bit brighter on the top. Okay. So when that's dry, now as I say, normally I would do one colour, go on to the next, go on to the next. By the time you've finished, you then go to the first colour and it's all nice and dry. I'm just showing you one colour. When I come to do the rest of the colours, I'll probably just do a speedy up thing. So yeah, so there's my second colour. So I think we're ready for a third coat, and this should be a final coat. So getting some paint on my brush, making sure it doesn't go all the way up the ferrule. Give it a little bit of a twist as we pull it down. Just knock the end off. And sorry, I have to keep taking my glasses off. We'll just give him a third and hopefully a final coat. So that is a third coat on, and I'm happy with that. So that's a nice solid coat, and he may look a little bit tanned. Don't worry about it, we're going to be doing some highlights later on. So yeah, that I'm happy with. So I'm going to let that dry, and then I'm going to paint the other colours on. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk you through what colours I'm using and why. While I paint, I'm going to do a little bit of fancy editing, and I'm going to speed the video up to match the length of the talk. So hopefully that will make things a little bit better. So we'll lay down the first coat, and then I'll probably do the third coat as well. So see you in a moment. Okay, so I'm going to do the shirt next, and I'm going to be using a AK11845 RAF Azure Blue. Now I'm using a bigger brush because it's a bigger area. However, I've done everything exactly the same. I've done 1 drop of water to 4 drops of, sorry, 1 drop of paint to 4 drops of water, and unfortunately the colour isn't actually visible that much over the zenithal highlight. It's a very light colour, so we need to be a little bit careful. Now I do have a little bit of overpaint on the arm, but that's not a problem because I have this is a stronger colour than the first colour that I've laid down. I can just neaten that up. So I'm using Azure Blue because the story is that Guy Gibson didn't fly in his jacket. He actually flew in his RAF issue shirt. Now I asked the guy I got the source from, who told me, I asked him about it, and his reference was the film Dambusters. So I did re-watch the film, and it actually looks possibly like he's actually got something underneath his shirt, because his shirt did look quite bulky. So although this pilot figure is designed to be painted as a jacket, I think it works quite well because it is quite bulky. So I'm going quite rough all over, but where the one colour meets another, I'm just being a little bit neat. I'm not worried about the quality of the painting, as in the coverage, because I know subsequent coats will neaten it up. Okay, so not an awful lot to see because of the contrast between the blue and the zenithal highlight, but there is the blue shirt in place. So what I'm going to do now is I want to do the jacket next, because I think that will make it instantly pleasing when you see the contrast between the jacket and the shirt. I think that will then, you know, when you've done that and you don't really see an awful lot of it, doesn't pop so much. I need to do something just to make it pop a little bit. So we'll get on with that. Okay, so for the life jacket I'm using AK11124 middle stone, and when I thinned the paint, I thinned it exactly the same way as I did with all the other paints, and I found it way too thin. So this has actually been thinned with 3 parts thinner and 1 part paint. Now I don't know if that's because the drop of paint wasn't as big as the other drops of paint, or if the drops of water were bigger, but this is roughly 1 to 3 mix. You'll find that with different paints, you know, even the same brand paint, you'll get different painting ratios. Now obviously the main area in the middle I'm slapping it on, but where the colour, where this particular area meets, for example here, the shirt, I'm just going carefully. And what I like to do, I didn't tip that off there. So sometimes what I'll do is I'll go around the outside, just getting all the border in, and then once I've got the border in I can just fill the middle bit in. Okay, so for the next colour I'm going to be using AK11181 dark blue. Now be very careful with this colour because it is actually a very dark strong colour, and I've actually found that I need to thin it 5 parts thinner to 1 part paint. It's going to go on quite wishy-washy and it will definitely need at least 3 coats, but I just think with it being so strong, it just needs that little bit extra thinning. Again, if you are a 1 coat painter, that's fine. And I think this is a little bit bright, to be honest with you. We will add washes and things to darken it, but I think at this point it might look a bit dark, but we'll see how I go. Now I am going a little bit thin, careful on the painting, sorry, even where I don't need to be. Actually he's looking okay. I think for first coat actually he's fine. You've got to take into account the zenithal highlighting. It will change the curve. Do you know what? I'm actually going to just paint over the boot as well. The boots are going to be black, which is a darker colour than the blue, so that will cover that up nicely. Yeah, no need to be neat on the boot. I am trying to avoid the straps because I think the straps will be a lighter colour, so try to avoid them. If you do accidentally paint over the straps, it isn't the end of the world. Okay, so that is the first layer of base coats in. I haven't put the details in yet, but that's the main majority of it. Now, especially on the trouser legs, you can see where that zenithal highlight is really coming through. You've got tonal variations, despite me adding, look at the legs there and look at the legs there. So that really has come through, and by keeping your paints nice and thin, it's not a good coverage coat, and that's because you've only put 1 layer on, but it's certainly added the colours in. It's just starting to add a little bit of interest. So I'm going to go over these base coats again. I'll do that off camera because we're going to do it exactly the same way, exactly the same order. Obviously I've done 3 layers on the flesh, so I would do the flesh, but I'm not going to this time. But we'll go through them. If my paint is completely dried, I'll just need to pop a little bit more paint down. You can see where a wet palette would come in useful. So I'm just going to get on with that, and I will see you when I've done the second coat. Okay, so I have put a second layer all over, exactly the same as before. Now you'll see a difference with the trousers. I thought that was too light. So I've added a little bit of black into the mix just to darken it a bit. You can see they're still blue. I seem to remember RAF trousers being almost black. They're definitely blue, but they're a lot closer to black than they are bright blue. That seems to be more of a navy blue. But so yeah, I've just added a bit of dark into it. So yeah, I'm happy with that. I mean, again, it won't be seen that well, so I don't think the exact shade is important. Well, it depends how much you know. So we need to put a third coat onto that. That's pretty much done, and I'm really happy with the result. I did add in this bit. When I did it the first time, I thought it might have been part of something else, but when I did the second layer, I thought, actually, I think that's part of the life jacket. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a third coat. However, I'm just going to thin the paints a little bit further, just so they run a little bit better. The paint's going to run into the recesses. Any little patches that we've missed, it's really just sort of a cover coat. And then once we've done that, we can start looking at adding all the details, the boots, the straps, the helmet, goggles, etc, etc. Okay, so I'm just going to show you the shirt with the thinner paint. it really isn't going to add an awful lot, but it's just get that paint on there and it will just give that a bit of a smoother coverage. One thing to note about the paint I've just noticed, I forgot to tell you, when you paint it's quite light and then it kind of darkens as it dries, so sometimes it can be a little bit scary when you put the paint on. You think, oh, that's not a good colour, but then it will darken as it dries. What's also important, I keep over painting, so use this layer to neaten things up. And yeah, and this should give you a nice solid coat by the time you've done this third coat. But this third coat, you do want to try and be, I've actually gone a little bit over the hand there, so I'm going to have to touch that up later on, but it's all good. So that's the shirt done, and then I'll get on with the rest of it. Okay, so now it's time to start putting in all the little details, and I'm going to start with the seat belts. I'm going to use AK11118 ochre, and I'm just the same as before. Now my paint is a little bit thicker this time. It's about just over a 1-to-1 ratio of thinner and paint. The reason for that is I don't want to be stuck here doing thin layers that are going to run multiple layers, so I'm just going to make it slightly thicker, and I'm probably going to end up needing 2 coats rather than 3, and we're just going to carefully pick out all of those details. Okay, so that's the straps done, and you can see it's just starting to add a little bit of extra colours. You've got some, I don't know if those straps, there's a couple of straps down the middle there, I don't know what colour they're supposed to be, so I've just painted them the same colour as all the other straps. It might be the wrong colour, but it looks nice, doesn't it? So that'll do me. I have done all the straps that you won't see. Obviously once he's in the seat you won't see most of that, but then I know it's done. The only bit I haven't done is a little buckle there. I don't know what colour to do the buckle, so I'm going to do it black. But I think we'll do his helmet next, then we'll do his boots. I'm going to try and be really flashy. I'm just going to catch that bit in the middle, which I believe would be a black tie. So I know RAF use black tie, or they used to. Obviously I'm comparing World War II uniforms with when I was in cadets, but yeah, we'll get on with the chocolate brown. Okay, so my apologies for this. I did start doing this and then the postman came, but I did actually want to show you all in one cut, so I'm having to start again. So I'm going to do the chocolate brown next for his helmet, and anything else I think is leather. Now the colour that I'm using is AK111, hang on, 11113 chocolate brackets chipping. Now what I'm doing is I'm going around and I'm blocking in all the edges like I did before, being careful not to go over bits like the flesh. And I'm doing the goggles as well, because that's going to lay down a darker colour for the black to go over, because that's the way I'm going to do the goggles. And also I did say that I use my sable brushes for painting base colours, and then I use my Kolinsky sable for doing like when I'm doing highlighting and shading and stuff. I've actually been using my Kolinsky sable brush for this because I can get it to a nice point, and it just makes it so much more pleasurable to paint with. Okay, so lastly, we're going to do black, and we're going to pick out some really fine details. Now this paint has only been thinned 1-to-1. I want it quite thick, and the first thing I'm going to do, I don't know if that's a crease in the shirt or if it's meant to be a tie, but I'm going to turn it into a tie, and I'm just going to paint a straight line down like so, and I'm going to thicken it at the top to make it look like a tie. and that may not be perfect, but I like it. Is that focusing? I've not got my glasses on. Sorry guys, I just went to sit back and the chair moved. Right. Okay, last little bit I did forget to tell you about. I'm actually using, I've forgotten where the bottle is, Vallejo acrylic metal colour. This is aluminium, white aluminium. Any colour, any silver colour will do. And I just want to pick out those little silver bits on the seat belts. I just think that's going to add something to it. Now this should do one coat. This is actually airbrush ready. And they're only little tiny details, but I just think they will add something. Now, something to note, I never ever use Kolinsky sable brushes for metallic work. I find the little particles, they get up in the ferrule and they damage brushes so quickly, so I just don't do it. And you know, if you're not sure, just go where you think they'll go. There's hardly any details on here, but I like to do them because then I know they're done. And I don't even know if I'm on camera, guys. I'm off camera a little bit. So there's a little buckle up here on the near the shoulders, and my brush has just flayed out a little bit. There we go. Make sure your brush has always got a nice point to it. I mean, the contrast against the blue isn't great, so it's not going to show up that much. But so if you don't want to do it, don't do it. But you know, I like to try and do it. There we go. Just adds a little tiny bit of shine, adds a little bit of something, and that is not the best paint job in the world, but I am more than happy to call that done. So let me clean the brushes and then I'll give you... Okay guys, I have no idea why I cut that last bit off part of the way through me talking, but there you go, that's me. Sorry, my headphones got all caught up. I want to do a little twirl, but my headphones gone funny. So this is my final result. I'm calling this a day on this video. We'll add the extra details in the next video, but I think you could call him done. You can see, especially on the legs, that zenithal highlight has come through. It's just added a little bit of colour variation. Look at the arms. The arms are really nice. That's come through really nice. Obviously you can do it as neat as you want, but yeah, he looks really, really nice. Now I am going to be adding extra detail to him. I'll give him, I'll do it off camera, but I'm going to go over him with a gloss varnish, and I'll explain the gloss varnish, because when you do oil washes, if you do a matte varnish, matte coat, it's going to stick to everything. If you're going to do some oil washes, do a gloss varnish so that it can all run into the recesses. So I think he's looking pretty sweet. As I said before, the pilot is optional, and painting him to this stage, that will more than do it. That's quite sufficient. I think we can identify him as Guy Gibson as opposed to another pilot. There's a couple of little bits I haven't done that well, actually. The straps down there could do with another coat, but I think that's fine. So let's put him in, shall we? Just got to untape this canopy. This isn't glued down, so I have to be a little bit careful, but I think we'll all be able to agree that he looks pretty good sitting in the cockpit. And with that seat being lowered, I think he's a nice height. He can see over the top. I'm trying to get the angle that you can see. It's difficult because gravity's not really my friend here, but you can see that he can see over the top, and when I put the canopy on, his head isn't too far from the top. You can see him through the canopy. You will lose a little bit once you paint the canopy, but yeah, he's really nice. So I might have to just sand his bum down a little bit to give it a bit of a different angle, because obviously I want these seat belts there. That's the position I might have him in. I don't know, might be a little bit of reworking required, but yeah, I really like that. That's added something. I think that's worth the money once they're painted up. Let's put him back on his little cocktail stick. But as I say, in the next video we'll be adding some washers, and then we'll do some highlights. Do you know what, the little seat belt metal bits on the seat belt, I think that's really added something, and also some of that detail has started to pop, but you wait till next week, guys. Oh, if you're going to stop there, guys, I haven't done it because I'm going to be adding more. I've done the glass lenses on the goggles black. I'm wondering whether just put a tiny bit of a very subtle green on it to give it a sheen. But if you want to stop there with no more detail, what I would advise is get a little bit of gloss varnish, go over those goggles to make them look like glass, and then I would go over his shoes, because obviously they polish their shoes in the Air Force. That's a matte paint, that won't do it. If your shoes look like that, you probably get court-martialed. But I'm not going to gloss it because I'm going through another stage. So that's where I'm going to finish the video, guys. Thanks ever so much for watching. Next week we will be adding some detail to him. I like that tie. I'm really happy with that tie. It's just added a little bit to it. But yeah, so so let's go over to the boring spreadsheet. So I just want to add this little bit in at the end. I've got my tile with all my paint on it. Now some of it's dried, so it's going to stay on, but what I do is I get me bit of kitchen roll that I finish with, pop a little bit of thinner on, which is ever so cheap because I made it myself, and then I can wipe that, and obviously it goes really messy. And then obviously that's almost ready. Once it's cleaned off, that's pretty much ready for the next batch. Obviously you can put paint on the tile over the dry paint, but this is why I like using tiles. The paint really doesn't want to stick. It's only if you leave it for days. But yeah, there you go, guys. That's why I like tiles. Okay, so the costings. So we are on to issue 7. I have actually changed the format a little bit so you can't see what's coming up. So the Hachette has cost $10.99. That means you've spent $63.93 on it so far. So you really need to be deciding if you want to carry on with this. If you don't like it, now is the time to stop when you've only lost 63 quid. Obviously we know what the future cost's going to be. I haven't spent anything on the Hong Kong models, and this is because I have the crew there. I bought it in issue 4, so the difference is reduced a little bit. Obviously, as I keep saying, all of the initial costs have been made on the Hong Kong versions early on. Now I really like the Hachette version, so I'm going to give it a 2. It was a few little parts. It wasn't difficult, but you did produce quite a bit, and there was a nice little bit of variation in colour. I found that very interesting, so I gave it a 2. But at the same time, I felt that it was as interesting as doing the pilot. So I gave the Hong Kong version a 2 because I gave the Hachette version a 2. I feel I would have been as interested in either on that particular stage. So, excuse me, Hachette is still winning by 1 point. which I think is fair. I do find myself trying to be a little bit biased towards the Hong Kong version, and this is because obviously I've invested all my money in the Hong Kong version and I do want it to come out better. But I'm also trying to reel it in a bit and try to be as neutral as I can. So I think that is a fair review. Next week I will be finishing off the pilot. I'll be adding a little bit more detail to him and make him just pop a little bit more. I'll be honest with you, I've not looked at the Hachette version at the time of recording this, so I don't know what's coming in issue 8. But as you can see, that's coming out next week on the 20th of September. So I hope you're enjoying this series. I am looking at starting to edit things. I'm finding this is actually taking quite a long time to produce because I'm doing my own building and I'm editing it. Then I'm doing the Hachette version when it gets released, and then I'm adding obviously the scoring system at the end. I am a little bit of a victim of things that I've already recorded. I've got to go with, but look, I'll stop the waffle now. I hope you join me next week when I think you'll find this is going to get more and more interesting as the weeks go on. Take care guys, I'll see you later.